Story number 1. The KFC Phantom Worker. I still wake up in the dead of night. The memory of that chilling December evening in 2005 lingering in my mind like the persistent echo of footsteps in an empty hallway. My name is Laura Bennett, and the events that unfolded during my first week at the rural KFC in Maplewood, Kentucky, have left an indelible mark on my soul. A constant reminder of the thin line between the living and the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. Maplewood was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other, where traditions were upheld with unwavering devotion, and where the winter nights were long, cold, and unforgiving. When I accepted the position as a night shift employee at the local KFC, I thought it would be a straightforward job working late hours, serving customers, and maintaining the cleanliness of the restaurant. Little did I know that my first night on the job would become a story I would never forget. It was December 15th, 2005, a particularly harsh winter night that had already seen a heavy snowfall. The town was cloaked in a thick blanket of white, the roads treacherous and the air biting cold. As I pulled up to the KFC, the bright red and white signage was a stark contrast against the monochromatic landscape. The parking lot was deserted, save for a few cars buried in the snow and the faint glow of streetlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, the restaurant was quiet, the usual bustle of customers replaced by the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional clink of utensils being cleaned. I was greeted by Mike, the manager, a stern yet kind-hearted man who had been with the company for over a decade. He showed me to my station, a small office at the back of the restaurant where I would keep track of inventory and handle any late-night orders. As the clock struck midnight, the few remaining customers left, leaving me and Mike to close up for the night. "All right, Laura," Mike said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty restaurant. "Most of the work's done. Just keep an eye on the kitchen and make sure everything's in order." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. Working the night shift meant fewer people and more time to settle into the routine. I settled into my chair, flipping through inventory sheets, when a soft knock sounded from the kitchen door. Startled, I looked up to see Mike moving towards the sound. "Probably just Jake checking on the fryers," Mike explained, a hint of amusement in his voice. Jake was one of the few employees who worked both day and night shifts, known for his easygoing nature. However, tonight, Mike's amusement was absent, replaced by a slight tension. "All right, let's see what's up," Mike said as he pushed open the kitchen door. The kitchen was dimly lit, the only light coming from the overhead fluorescents that flickered intermittently. The sound had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Mike approached the fryers, inspecting the machinery, while I returned to my desk, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Minutes passed without incident, and I began to focus on my work again. Just as I was about to tally up the inventory for the night, I heard it again, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the far corner of the kitchen. My heart raced as I glanced up, spotting a shadowy figure standing near the door. It was a man dressed in the standard KFC uniform, his posture rigid and eyes fixed on something beyond my sight. "Mike," I whispered, feeling a chill run down my spine. "Do you see that?" Mike followed my gaze, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Yeah, I see him." Jake said he was finishing up, but I didn't hear him come in. "Are you sure?" Before I could respond, the man turned towards us, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, a silent sentinel in the dead of night. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Jake," Mike called out cautiously. "Jake, are you there?" No response came, only the persistent tapping that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the kitchen. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, my breath visible in the cold air. I felt an invisible presence pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the shadowy figure began to move towards us. Mike reached for the nearest flashlight, shining it directly at the man, hoping to illuminate him and get some answers. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. The man remained silent, his eyes never leaving mine. He took a step forward, and I could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face. The same face I had seen countless times during the day, but never like this. It was as if something had taken control, transforming him into something otherworldly. "Mike, call the police," I urged, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the phone on my desk. But before Mike could reach it, the man vanished, dissolving into the shadows as if he had never been there. The room returned to its eerie stillness, the temperature rising back to normal. Mike and I stood there, our breaths heavy, processing what we had just witnessed. "All right, we need to check the security footage," Mike said, his voice steady despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside him. "Maybe we can figure out what just happened." We hurried to the office, pulling up the security tapes from the previous hour. As we watched, the footage revealed nothing out of the ordinary. No one entered or exited the kitchen beyond Jake. Confusion and frustration mounted as we replayed the tapes, searching for any sign of the mysterious figure. Suddenly, around 12:30 a.m., the screen flickered, and there he was, the shadowy man in the KFC uniform. He stood still for a moment before walking towards the kitchen door, pausing as if listening for something. Then, without warning, he turned and began moving back towards the dining area, disappearing into the darkness. "We don't get anyone like that," Mike muttered, his brow furrowing. Jake never mentioned anything unusual. A few days after that night, the unsettling occurrences continued. Doors would open and close on their own. Utensils moved from their places, and the faint sound of laughter echoed through the empty restaurant. The staff began to whisper about a ghostly presence, a restless spirit haunting the very place that had been a cornerstone of our community. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of the Maplewood KFC, speaking with longtime residents and scouring old records. It was then that I discovered the tragic story of James Miller, a dedicated employee who had worked at the KFC for over a decade. One winter night, in December 1995, James had died in a freak accident in the kitchen, his body found among the fryers with no sign of foul play. The incident had been covered up, the police ruling it an unfortunate accident. But the community had never truly forgotten him. The more I learned about James, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. His dedication to his job, his tragic demise, and the lingering sadness that seemed to pervade the restaurant all pointed to the possibility that his spirit had remained, unable to find peace after his untimely death. Armed with this knowledge, Mike and I decided to perform a small memorial in the kitchen, a gesture of respect and acknowledgement for James. We placed a photo of him on the counter, lit a candle, and said a few words of remembrance, hoping to soothe his restless spirit. That night, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, the atmosphere in the KFC shifted. The cold presence that had haunted us seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sense of warmth and closure. The strange occurrences ceased, the shadows no longer lurking in the corners, and the oppressive silence lifted. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant returned to its usual self, the haunting memories of that winter night fading into the background. But the legend of the KFC Phantom Worker lived on, a story of tragedy and redemption that bound our small community together in a shared understanding of the unseen forces that watch over us. Years have passed since that eerie December, but the lessons learned remain with me. The importance of respect, remembrance, and honoring those who have come before us are now ingrained in the very fabric of our workplace. The KFC in Maplewood continues to serve its beloved fried chicken, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring bonds that connect us all. But sometimes, on particularly cold winter nights, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the kitchen, a reminder that some spirits never truly leave. but find solace in the acknowledgement and respect we offer them. The whispers of the past echo through my mind, a haunting yet comforting presence that ensures we never forget the lessons of that fateful night. And so, I warn others, respect the places you work, honor the memories of those who have passed, and understand that some stories transcend the boundaries of life and death. For in the heart of Kentucky, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward understanding and eternal peace. Story number 2. Echoes in the Frost, the KFC haunting of Minnesota. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that fateful winter evening in 2010 haunting me like the relentless frost that once encased our small KFC in Duluth, Minnesota. My name is Emily Larson, and the events that unfolded during those icy nights have left an indelible mark on my soul, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the ordinary and the supernatural. It was December, the heart of winter in Minnesota, when I started my shift at the local KFC on Lake Avenue. The restaurant was a beacon of warmth in the otherwise frozen landscape, its red and white stripes a familiar sight against the backdrop of snow-covered streets and barren trees. I was one of the night shift employees, a role that suited my introverted nature. The quiet hours allowed me to observe the subtle rhythms of the night, the hum of the refrigerators, and the occasional late-night customer seeking solace in a bucket of fried chicken. One particularly frigid night, as the temperature plummeted well below freezing, the restaurant began to close for the evening. The last of the customers left, their breaths visible in the icy air as they hurried home, with the front door locked and the parking lot deserted. Only a handful of us remained to clean up and prepare for the next day. As I wiped down the counter, the silence was almost comforting, broken only by the occasional clink of dishes and the distant howl of the wind outside. But as the night deepened, an unsettling stillness settled over the restaurant. It was then that the first oddity occurred, a faint, eerie laughter echoing from the back of the kitchen. Startled, I glanced around, but there was no one there. "Did you hear that?" I asked Jake, one of my coworkers, who was restocking the shelves nearby. He nodded, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. "Yeah, must be the wind playing tricks on us." But the laughter didn't stop. Instead, it grew louder, more distinct, like the playful giggles of children lost in an unseen playground. My skin prickled with unease as the sound reverberated through the empty dining area. Moments later, the clatter of dishes began, plates and utensils seemingly moving on their own accord. I watched in horror as a stack of plates toppled over without any human intervention. "Something's not right," Jake muttered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Before we could react, a cold draft swept through the restaurant, making me shiver involuntarily. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ignore the creeping dread that settled in my chest. It was then that Sarah, another employee, let out a gasp. "I feel like someone's standing right behind me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, but she was alone, her eyes wide with fear. The sensation of being watched lingered, an invisible presence pressing down on us. We exchanged worried glances, the rational part of our minds struggling to explain the inexplicable. As the night wore on, the strange occurrences intensified. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of our vision, fleeting glimpses of figures that vanished when we turned to look directly at them. The lights flickered sporadically, casting long, distorted shadows across the tiled floor. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any stranger, a soft, cold touch brushed against my shoulder. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The room was empty, save for the three of us huddled together in the dimly lit restaurant. Panic began to set in as the reality of our situation sank in. We were not alone. "Maybe it's just our imagination," Jake suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No, it's real. I felt it. The oppressive presence grew heavier, the air thick with an unspoken sorrow. We decided to investigate, hoping to find a logical explanation for the haunting. As we approached the kitchen, the temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The eerie laughter returned, louder and more desperate, echoing through the halls like the cries of lost souls. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was suffocating. The once vibrant space was now shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the flickering overhead bulbs. Suddenly, a shadowy figure materialized in front of us, a woman dressed in outdated, formal attire, her face obscured by the darkness. Her presence was both haunting and sorrowful, her eyes hollow voids staring directly into our souls. "Why are you here?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my throat. The apparition remained silent, her form wavering like smoke in the wind. Without warning, she extended a translucent hand towards us, her fingers outstretched in a gesture of pleading. The room grew colder still, the frost creeping up the walls as the shadows intensified around us. "We need to help her," Jake whispered, his eyes fixed on the ghostly figure. But Sarah recoiled, her fear palpable. "No, we need to leave. This is beyond us." Before we could decide what to do, the apparition began to fade, her form dissolving into the ether like mist under the morning sun. The oppressive chill lifted, replaced by an uneasy silence that filled the kitchen. We stood there, hearts pounding, the memory of her sorrowful eyes etched into our minds. As we made our way back to the dining area, the strange occurrences began to subside, the shadows receding and the eerie sounds fading into the night. Exhausted and shaken, we decided to call it a night, the experience leaving us with more questions than answers. In the days that followed, the legend of the haunted KFC in Duluth grew, fueled by our first-hand accounts. Other employees reported similar experiences, strange noises, fleeting apparitions, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The once cheerful restaurant became a place of whispered fears and unsettling tales, the spirit of the lost woman forever intertwined with our everyday lives. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of our KFC, uncovering a tragic story from decades past. In the late 1960s, a young woman named Margaret Green had worked at the restaurant. Known for her kindness and dedication, Margaret had a promising future ahead of her. But one bitter winter night, during a severe snowstorm, she vanished without a trace. Despite extensive searches, no evidence of her disappearance was ever found, leaving her family and the community devastated by the unanswered questions. As I pieced together the fragments of her story, it became clear that Margaret's spirit lingered, unable to find peace after her untimely disappearance. The rituals and traditions that Joe Sanders, our manager, had enforced weren't just about maintaining quality, they were about honoring the memories and ensuring that the past didn't repeat itself. Armed with this knowledge, I approached Jake and Sarah with a plan to help Margaret find peace. We decided to hold a memorial service at the restaurant, inviting former employees and local residents to come together in remembrance. On the night of the ceremony, the atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope and apprehension. We lit candles, shared stories of Margaret's kindness, and offered prayers for her soul to find rest. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the restaurant began to rise, the oppressive chill dissipating as the candles burned brighter. The shadows receded, replaced by a warm, comforting glow that filled the space. It was then that the apparition of Margaret appeared once more, her form clearer and her expression serene. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can finally rest." With those final words, her spirit faded, leaving behind a profound sense of peace and closure. The strange occurrences ceased, the shadows no longer lurking, and the eerie sounds silenced. The haunted presence that had once plagued our KFC was gone, allowing Margaret's spirit to move on from the earthly realm. In the years that followed, our KFC returned to its role as a beloved community hub, the legend of the haunted nights becoming a story of redemption and remembrance. We continued to honor Margaret's memory, ensuring that her story was never forgotten and that the traditions we upheld were rooted in respect and compassion. But the memory of those winter nights remains, a haunting reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead, and the power of respect in bridging that divide. I often find myself gazing out at the snow-covered streets, the lingering whispers of the past echoing through my mind, a testament to the enduring bonds between our world and the spirits that watch over us from beyond. And so, I warn others, respect the places you frequent, honor the memories of those who have passed, and understand that some encounters transcend our understanding. For in the heart of Minnesota, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward understanding and eternal peace. Story number 3. Whispers in the Frost. The KFC Footprints Mystery. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that chilling December evening in 2010 haunting me like the relentless frost that once blanketed our small Tennessee town. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and the events that unfolded at our local KFC have left an indelible mark on my soul. A constant reminder of how thin the veil is between the ordinary and the supernatural. It was a frigid winter night, the kind where the cold seeps into your bones and the world outside is reduced to a monochrome landscape of snow and ice. I worked the late shift at the KFC on Willow Street, a modest establishment that served as a gathering spot for locals seeking comfort in a warm meal after long days. That night, I was the last to leave, ensuring that everything was in order before shutting down for the night. As the clock struck midnight, I began the usual routine, cleaning the counters, restocking supplies, and making sure the kitchen was spotless. The restaurant was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional drip from the faucets. The snowfall had been steady all evening, thick and heavy, turning the parking lot into a white wasteland under the glow of the fluorescent lights. Around 1:30 a.m., I decided to do a final sweep of the dining area before heading home. The chill in the air was more pronounced inside the restaurant, a stark contrast to the warmth of the kitchen. As I approached the back door to check the storage room, something caught my eye: strange footprints leading from the side entrance straight to the kitchen. At first, I thought they were just the result of someone slipping on the icy pavement outside. But there was something distinctly unusual about them. The footprints were larger than any of our customers, with elongated toes and unnaturally long strides that suggested a person with abnormally long legs. The snow was undisturbed, except for these footprints that seemed to trail directly into the back of the restaurant. My heart began to race as I realized that the back door was firmly locked. No one could have entered or exited without a key. Must be someone from the town, I murmured to myself, trying to rationalize the bizarre discovery, determined to get to the bottom of it. I called over my coworker, Jake, who was just finishing his shift. "Jake, come here for a sec," I said, pointing towards the footprints. He looked up from his paperwork, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Weird footprints. Look, they're leading straight to the kitchen, but the back door's locked. Maybe someone forgot their keys and had to climb in." I shook my head. "No, it doesn't make sense. These are too big, and the pattern's off. It's like someone, or something, else was here." Jake approached the back door and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "That's odd. No one ever uses this door except for deliveries. Maybe the lock stuck." As we stood there, staring at the mysterious footprints, a sudden gust of wind swept through the open front door, sending a flurry of snow inside. The restaurant seemed to grow colder, the air thick with an unsettling presence. I felt a shiver run down my spine, a sense of being watched that I couldn't shake off. "Let's call the police," Jake suggested, his voice tense. "This feels off." Before I could respond, I heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen, a soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the empty restaurant. We exchanged uneasy glances, our fear mounting as the tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the storm outside. Jake nodded, his eyes wide with apprehension. "Yeah, it sounds like someone's trying to get in." Gathering my courage, I approached the kitchen, the tapping guiding me forward. The door to the kitchen was ajar, the interior shrouded in darkness. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, expecting to find an intruder or some sort of prank. Instead, I was met with an empty room, no one in sight. "Hello," I called out, my voice quivering slightly. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered me, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I stepped further into the kitchen, the cold air making my skin prickle. That's when I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes reflecting the light from the refrigerator, staring back at me from the far corner of the room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The eyes blinked slowly, and a shadowy figure began to take shape. It was tall and slender, with elongated limbs and an aura of sorrow that seemed to emanate from its very being. The figure moved towards me, its movements graceful yet unsettling, as if it were gliding rather than walking. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling with fear. The figure remained silent, its presence overwhelming. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, a deep sense of longing and pain filling the space between us. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, my breath visible in the icy air as I struggled to stay calm. "Jake, we need to leave," I whispered urgently, but before he could respond, the figure raised a hand, pointing directly at the footprints leading to the back door. I followed the gesture, my mind racing to understand what was happening. The footprints began to glow faintly, as if illuminated by an unseen light, and the room seemed to warp around them. The tapping sound returned, louder than before, now accompanied by faint whispers that echoed through the kitchen. The figure began to fade, its form becoming more transparent as if it were dissipating into the very air. "Respect," it whispered, the word hanging heavy in the cold air, before disappearing completely. Shaken, I turned to Jake, who had been standing beside me silently. "We need to get out of here," I said firmly, grabbing his arm. "Something isn't right." We rushed to the back door, the footprints leading us towards it with an almost magnetic pull. As we reached the door, it swung open effortlessly, revealing the snow-covered parking lot outside. Without a second thought, we bolted out into the storm, the cold biting into our skin as we hurried to our car. As we sped away from the KFC, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind howling louder as if trying to keep us from escaping. My mind raced with questions and fear, the encounter leaving me shaken to my core. Who or what was that figure? And why did it warn us with the word respect? In the days that followed, the story of the mysterious footprints and the ghostly figure spread through our town, turning our local KFC into a place of whispered fears and eerie legends. Employees reported similar strange occurrences, doors opening by themselves, utensils moving without reason, and the occasional glimpse of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the dining area. One night, months after our encounter, I received a call from Jake. His voice was frantic, filled with desperation. "Sarah, you need to come back to the KFC. Something's wrong." I hesitated, the memory of that night still fresh in my mind, but concern for my friend pushed me to respond. "I'm on my way." When I arrived, the KFC was shrouded in darkness, the storm having returned with a vengeance. The front door was ajar, and the same eerie silence filled the air. I made my way inside, the cold rush hitting me immediately, reminding me of the last time I had been here. Jake was waiting at the counter, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "They're back," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "The footprints, they're moving again." We approached the kitchen, the tapping sound once again echoing through the empty restaurant. The back door was still locked, but the footprints were leading us towards a different part of the kitchen this time. As we followed them, The temperature dropped once more, and the feeling of being watched intensified. In the far corner of the kitchen, the ghostly figure appeared again, her eyes hollow and sorrowful. This time, she was surrounded by an ethereal glow, the footprints beneath her feet shimmering with an otherworldly light. "Respect the rules," she whispered, her voice filled with a profound sadness. I felt a surge of understanding and guilt wash over me. "What rules? What do you want from us?" The figure reached out, her fingers brushing against my arm with an icy touch. "Honor the traditions. Protect the recipe. Do not let greed consume what was meant to be cherished." Before I could respond, the figure began to fade once more, the storm outside subsiding as quickly as it had intensified. The footprints stopped glowing, and the oppressive presence lifted, leaving us alone in the now quiet restaurant. Jake and I stood there, the weight of her message sinking in. We realized that the rules referred to the sanctity of the KFC recipe, a legacy that Joe Sanders had guarded fiercely. It wasn't just about maintaining the quality of our food. It was about preserving the traditions and values that had built our community. In the aftermath, we took steps to honor her message. We reinforced the rituals that Joe had instilled, ensuring that the recipe was protected and that the essence of what made our KFC special remained intact. The strange occurrences gradually ceased, the haunted presence finally finding peace as we respected the traditions that had kept our success alive. But the memory of that night lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin line between honoring tradition and succumbing to the darkness that can arise when respect is forsaken. The KFC on Willow Street remained a beloved establishment, a place where community thrived and traditions were cherished. But the legend of the haunted footprints and the ghostly woman continued to echo through our town. And so, I warn others, respect the traditions that bind us. Honor the memories of those who came before, and understand that some mysteries are best left undisturbed. For in the heart of Tennessee, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward understanding and eternal peace. Story number 4. Whispers Behind the Stripes. The Midnight KFC Encounter. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that fateful winter evening in 1997 etched into my mind like the greasy fingerprints left on the counter of our local KFC. My name is Mark Thompson, and the events that unfolded that night have haunted me ever since. A constant reminder of how thin the veil is between the ordinary and the supernatural. It was December 15th, 1997. A night so cold that the breath of every passerby turned to mist in the frigid air. My friends and I had just wrapped up a late-night party at Jake's house, celebrating the end of finals week. The excitement was palpable, the energy buzzing as we decided to extend the festivities with a trip to our favorite late-night spot, KFC. As we piled into my old Jeep, the snow began to fall more heavily, each flake landing softly on the windshield, blurring the world outside into a monochrome haze. The roads were slick, and visibility was low, but the promise of hot, crispy fried chicken kept our spirits high. We laughed and joked, the warmth inside the car a stark contrast to the biting cold that enveloped us. When we finally arrived at the KFC on Maple Street, the night was eerily quiet. The neon sign buzzed intermittently, casting a red and white glow onto the freshly fallen snow. Normally bustling with customers and the clatter of fried chicken being prepared, the restaurant tonight was deserted. No one was inside, not a single soul in sight. "Strange," Jake muttered, scratching his head. "I thought they'd be open this late." "Nah, man," I replied, stepping out into the cold. "They're always open, right? Let's just grab some food and head back." We approached the door, the automatic entry system making a soft chime as we pushed it open. The interior was dimly lit, the usual hum of conversation and sizzling fryers conspicuously absent. Only the sound of our footsteps echoed through the empty dining area as we made our way to the counter. I placed our order: 2 buckets of chicken, a dozen wings, and a couple of large sodas before taking a seat at a nearby table. The warmth from the single overhead light cast long shadows across the room, giving everything a slightly distorted, almost surreal appearance. We waited, the silence pressing in around us, until our order was ready. As I reached for the bucket of chicken, I glanced around the restaurant and froze. Every chair and table had been moved, rearranged into a disorganized sprawl that made the space feel unwelcoming and chaotic. My heart began to race as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Must have been a cleaning crew, I whispered, though the idea seemed laughable at this hour. We continued our meal in uneasy silence, the absence of other customers heightening our sense of isolation. It was then that the atmosphere shifted. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop abruptly, a chill settling over us despite the heating system working overtime. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Did you guys feel that?" Sarah, one of our friends, asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Feel what?" Jake replied, looking around nervously. Before she could answer, a faint noise pierced the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the back of the restaurant. We all turned our heads in that direction, the sound growing slightly louder and more insistent. My eyes darted to the kitchen door, but there was no one inside. "Probably just the wind or something," Jake suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move, a shadowy figure standing in the far corner of the dining area, partially obscured by the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I focused on the apparition, its form vague and indistinct, like smoke swirling in the air. I reached out to Sarah, trying to share the moment, but she looked back at me with wide, fearful eyes. Before we could react, a loud, hollow laugh echoed through the restaurant, emanating from the kitchen. It was a sound that sent chills down my spine, the kind of laughter that wasn't born of joy but of something far more sinister. The shadowy figure began to move, its form becoming more defined as it approached us, though still retaining an ethereal quality. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound authoritative. There was no response, only the lingering echo of the laughter and the soft tapping that had now ceased. The presence of the figure was overwhelming, an invisible force that pressed in on us from all sides. My friends huddled closer together, their expressions mirroring my own terror. Without warning, the shadowy figure vanished, leaving behind an oppressive silence that was almost deafening. The temperature in the restaurant began to rise again, the chill dissipating as quickly as it had arrived. We sat there, frozen in place, unable to process what had just happened. "Let's get out of here," Jake finally said, his voice shaky. We hurriedly gathered our things, the unease lingering as we made our way to the door. As I reached for the handle, a cold draft swept through the restaurant, making me shiver involuntarily. I glanced back once more, half expecting to see the shadowy figure reappear. But the restaurant was empty once again. We left the KFC without saying another word, the eerie experience casting a pall over our once carefree evening. As we drove away, the sense of being watched didn't leave me. One of my friends, Tom, who had been quiet throughout, finally spoke up, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "I swear, I felt someone following us, like eyes on us from the darkness." Jake glanced back in the rearview mirror, but the road was empty, the snow falling thickly, muffling any sounds from behind us. The unease deepened as we continued our drive, the memory of the shadowy figure and the hollow laughter refusing to fade. In the days that followed, our story spread through the town of Maplewood, the same town that prided itself on its friendly community and beloved local businesses. But the KFC incident brought a dark shadow over our reputation, turning the once bustling restaurant into a place of whispered fears and unsettling legends. Employees reported similar strange occurrences, doors opening by themselves, utensils moving without reason, and the occasional glimpse of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the dining area. One night, A few months after our encounter, I received a call from Jake. His voice was frantic, filled with desperation. "Mark, you need to come to the KFC. Something's wrong." I rushed to his house, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and concern. When I arrived at the KFC, the front door was wide open, the restaurant dark and silent. Jake was there, standing in the doorway, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice shaking. "The staff can't explain it. They keep seeing shadows, hearing voices, and sometimes they say they feel like they're being watched. It's like someone is here, haunting the place." I stepped inside, the chill from that night still lingering in my mind. The restaurant was just as eerie as when we had left it, the empty tables and chairs now feeling more menacing. We made our way to the kitchen, where the staff huddled together, their expressions a mix of fear and confusion. "There's no logical explanation," one of the employees said, shaking his head. "We're all seeing things, shadows moving, doors opening and closing on their own. It's like the place is alive." As we stood there, the atmosphere grew thick with tension, the air heavy with unspoken fears. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the kitchen. Though there was no one there, we turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the room, his form indistinct and wavering like smoke. "Please, leave us alone," the figure whispered, its voice a hollow echo that sent shivers down my spine. We stared at the apparition, unable to comprehend its presence. The figure began to move towards us, its form becoming more defined, revealing the outline of a woman dressed in old-fashioned attire, her clothing reminiscent of a bygone era. Her eyes were hollow voids, filled with sorrow and longing. "Respect the rules," she intoned, her voice growing louder. "Do not tamper with what is sacred." Before we could react, the figure vanished, the oppressive silence returning once more. The employees let out a collective sigh of relief, though the fear remained etched in their eyes. "What do we do?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, my mind racing to find a solution. "We honor her," I said firmly. "We respect the place and the traditions that keep it safe." Together, we made a pact to maintain the sanctity of the KFC, ensuring that nothing would disrupt the delicate balance that seemed to protect us from the malevolent presence lurking in the shadows. We implemented new procedures, reinforcing the restaurant against any future disturbances, and made a conscious effort to honor the traditions that had been forgotten. Over time, the strange occurrences began to subside, the shadowy figures and hollow laughter fading into the background. The KFC returned to its bustling self, the community's fears gradually diminishing as life went on. But the memory of that night remained, a haunting reminder of the thin line between the ordinary and the supernatural. Years later, I still think about that winter night and the lessons we learned about respect and tradition. The KFC in Maple. Story number 5. The KFC fire and the cursed recipe. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that fateful Christmas Eve in 1980 burning into my mind like the flames that consumed our beloved KFC in Michigan. My name is Michael Thompson, and the events that unfolded that night have left an indelible scar on my soul, a constant reminder of the thin line between tradition and the dark forces that seek to disrupt it. Our KFC was more than just a restaurant. It was the heart of our small community in Lansing, owned by Joe Sanders, a man with a reputation for being both charismatic and deeply superstitious. The restaurant was a gathering place where neighbors met, friendships blossomed, and traditions were cherished. Joe was fiercely protective of our secret recipe, a guarded family heirloom passed down through generations. According to him, it wasn't just the blend of herbs and spices that made our chicken legendary. It was also imbued with a sense of reverence and strict adherence to certain rituals that kept our success alive. That Christmas Eve, the air was crisp, and the streets were blanketed in a serene layer of snow. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere was warm and bustling with the chatter of satisfied customers. Joe was overseeing the kitchen, meticulously ensuring that every batch of chicken met his exacting standards. The scent of fried chicken mingled with the festive aroma of pine from the Christmas tree adorning the corner of the dining area. As midnight approached, the restaurant began to wind down. The last of the customers left, and the staff started cleaning up, preparing for the night shift. It was then that the strange noises began. First, it was barely noticeable, a faint scratching sound coming from the back of the kitchen. Joe, ever vigilant, dismissed it as the settling of the building or perhaps a stray animal seeking shelter. But as the night deepened, the noises grew louder and more distinct, accompanied by an unsettling feeling that someone or something was watching us. "Joe, did you hear that?" asked Sarah, one of our dedicated cooks, her voice tinged with unease. He nodded slowly, his face betraying a rare hint of worry. "Probably just the old pipes acting up. Let's keep working." But the disturbances didn't stop. Doors that had been securely closed were found ajar. Utensils moved from their designated spots, and strange symbols appeared etched into the walls of the kitchen. These symbols were intricate, almost ritualistic, and none of us recognized them. Joe's face grew pale as he examined the markings, his superstitious beliefs coming to the forefront. "We need to leave," he declared, his voice shaking. "Something's not right here." Before we could react, the temperature in the kitchen plummeted. The warmth evaporated, replaced by an icy chill that seeped into our bones. Shadows seemed to dance unnaturally across the walls, and the air was thick with an oppressive presence. The flames in the ovens flickered violently, casting eerie, elongated shadows that moved of their own accord. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light enveloped the kitchen, followed by an explosion that sent us sprawling across the floor. Smoke filled the room, choking us as we struggled to find our bearings. The once familiar kitchen was now a scene of chaos and destruction, the fire consuming everything in its path. Flames licked the walls, and the screams of unseen entities echoed through the smoke-filled air. "We need to get out," Joe shouted, pulling us to our feet amidst the inferno. But as we tried to escape, the doors seemed to vanish, replaced by solid walls of fire that blocked our path. Panic set in as the realization dawned we were trapped. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. Spinning around, I came face to face with the apparition of a woman dressed in old-fashioned attire, her eyes hollow and her expression one of profound sorrow. "Leave this place," she whispered, her voice echoing through the flames. "Respect the recipe, or suffer the consequences." I tried to speak, but no words came out, my voice lost in the roaring fire. The presence of the ghostly figure intensified, her form becoming more defined as she moved closer, her eyes piercing through me with an otherworldly intensity. "We must honor the traditions," Joe cried out, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. "It's the only way." As if on cue, the fire began to recede, the walls of flame dissipating and the oppressive chill lifting. The doors reappeared, and the night shift staff rushed in, alerted by the commotion and the relentless fire. With their help, we managed to extinguish the blaze, but the damage was irreparable. Our beloved KFC was reduced to ashes, a smoldering ruin where laughter and warmth once thrived. In the aftermath, the community rallied around us, offering support and condolences, but the sense of unease lingered, the memories of that night haunting our every thought. Joe insisted that the fire was no accident, that the curse of the recipe had been unleashed, demanding respect and adherence to the rituals that had kept our success alive. Reports of strange occurrences continued long after the fire. Employees who worked at the rebuilt restaurant spoke of cold spots, unexplained noises, and shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the kitchen. Some claimed to see the ghostly woman, her presence a constant reminder of the night the fire consumed us all. One particularly frigid night, I found myself alone in the kitchen, the snowstorm outside howling like a chorus of lost souls. as I prepared a batch of chicken. The temperature dropped sharply, and the familiar chill returned. The lights flickered, and the air grew thick with the same oppressive presence we had felt that night. The scratching sound began again, louder this time, emanating from the walls. I turned, heart pounding, to see the intricate symbols etched into the tiles. Glowing faintly in the dim light, the ghostly apparition of the woman materialized once more. Her eyes filled with sorrow and her presence more menacing than ever. "Respect the recipe," she intoned, her voice carrying the weight of countless tormented souls. "Honor the traditions, or suffer the consequences." Terrified, I stumbled backward, knocking over a container of spices that exploded into a cloud of red pepper dust. The smoke stung my eyes as I tried to flee, but the doors refused to budge, the flames reigniting and forming an impenetrable barrier once more. Desperation clawed at me as I remembered Joe's words. "Honor the traditions," I whispered, reaching for the book of rituals he had kept hidden behind the counter. Flipping through the pages, I found the incantations we had neglected, the very rites that were meant to protect us from the curse. Gathering every ounce of courage, I began to chant, my voice trembling but determined. The symbols on the walls began to shimmer, the flames responding to the ancient words. The ghostly figure of the woman writhed in agony, her form distorting as the power of the rituals took hold. The oppressive presence lifted, the air warming as the flames dissipated. The doors to the kitchen opened, and the chill receded, leaving behind a sense of peace and closure. The ghostly woman faded into the ether, her sorrowful gaze lingering for a moment before she vanished completely. Exhausted but relieved, I collapsed to the floor, the book of rituals clutched tightly in my hands. The curse had been lifted, the darkness dispelled by our newfound respect for the traditions that had kept our success alive. But the memory of that night remained, a haunting reminder of the price we had paid for neglecting the sacred rituals. In the years that followed, our KFC thrived once more, the ghostly disturbances fading into the background as we adhered strictly to the rituals and traditions that had saved us. But the legend of the cursed recipe lived on, a tale of caution passed down through the generations, ensuring that we never forgot the night the fire consumed us and the spirits that demanded our respect. I often find myself gazing at the rebuilt restaurant, now a beacon of warmth and community, and I remember the ghostly woman who saved us from our own hubris. The whispers of that night echo in my mind, a constant reminder to honor the traditions that bind us and to respect the unseen forces that watch over us from the shadows. And so, I warn others, respect the traditions that keep your world in balance. Honor the memories of those who came before, and understand that some secrets are guarded by forces beyond our comprehension. For in the heart of Michigan, amidst the flickering lights and the lingering shadows, lies a darkness that can consume even the brightest of flames, but also a light that can guide us toward redemption and eternal peace. Story number 6. Whispers in the Fryer, the KFC ghost of Tulsa. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that chilling evening in Tulsa etched into my mind like the greasy fingerprints left on the counter of that haunted KFC. My name is Daniel Matthews, and the events that unfolded on that cold winter night have left an indelible mark on my soul. A constant reminder of the thin veil between the living and the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. It was January 14th, 1998. A night so bitterly cold that even the neon lights of the fast food restaurant flickered against the biting wind outside. I had just finished my shift at the local auto repair shop and decided to grab a late-night meal. The thought of some crispy fried chicken to warm me up was too tempting to resist. As I approached the familiar red and white-striped facade of KFC on Fifth Avenue, the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I pushed open the door, the jingle of the bell above announcing my arrival. The warm, greasy aroma of fried chicken enveloped me, a stark contrast to the icy grip of winter outside. The restaurant was nearly empty, save for a lone employee behind the counter. wiping down the surfaces with a cloth that had seen better days. The clock on the wall glowed 2 a.m. in bright red numbers, and the harsh fluorescent lights cast long, sterile shadows across the tiled floor. As I approached the counter to place my order, a sudden chill ran down my spine. The temperature inside the restaurant seemed to drop abruptly, the warmth replaced by an inexplicable coldness that made me shiver involuntarily. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the draft sneaking in from the doorway. Just a little cold tonight, I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at my gut. I ordered a bucket of chicken, a side of mashed potatoes, and a large soda. The employee, a tired-looking woman named Karen, nodded silently, her eyes darting briefly to the back of the restaurant before she began preparing my order. I found a seat near the window, the glass slightly frosted over, blurring the view of the empty parking lot outside. Minutes later, my food arrived. I tucked into the meal, savoring the warmth and comfort it provided. As I ate, my eyes wandered around the restaurant, noting the empty tables and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. It was then that I saw her, a shadowy figure standing in the far corner of the dining area, partially obscured by the darkness. At first, I thought it was just another late-night patron, but there was something off about her. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, her attire reminiscent of the 1950s, an oversized coat, a wide-brimmed hat, and gloves that seemed out of place in the modern setting of the fast food joint. Her presence felt out of time, an anachronistic ghost wandering through the present. I glanced at Karen, hoping she hadn't noticed the apparition, but she was focused intently on her work, oblivious to the figure standing there. My heart began to race as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a reflection in the window. But as I looked again, the woman remained, her eyes meeting mine with a hollow, sorrowful gaze that sent shivers down my spine. I felt a compulsion to stand up, to confront whatever or whoever it was, but fear held me in place. The temperature continued to drop, and the feeling of being watched intensified, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. My breath became visible in the frigid air, each exhale a puff of mist that quickly dissipated. Gathering what little courage I had, I decided to address her. "Excuse me," I called out softly, my voice wavering. "Can I help you?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering my question, but didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. The lights above flickered ominously, casting erratic shadows that danced around her form. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the empty restaurant, though there was no one else there. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, my heart pounding in my chest. Still no response. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator units and the soft crackle of the deep fryers. I watched as the woman slowly raised her hand, pointing towards the kitchen. My curiosity outweighed my fear, and I found myself rising from my seat, following her gesture. As I approached the kitchen, the temperature plummeted further, my breath turning to frost as I entered the room. The kitchen was empty, the stainless steel surfaces gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The smell of frying chicken hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of stale grease and something else, something metallic and cold. I turned to see the woman standing at the far end of the kitchen, her figure still ghostly and ethereal. She looked directly at me, her eyes filled with an indescribable sadness. "Help us," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room like a mournful wind. Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, plunging the kitchen into darkness for a split second before returning to their bright glow. In that fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of her true form, a visage twisted with pain and sorrow, her face contorted as if she had suffered a great tragedy. I recoiled in horror, the image burned into my mind. I stumbled backward, tripping over a discarded piece of packaging and falling to the floor. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in around me. The temperature continued to drop, and I felt an invisible force pressing down on me, making it difficult to breathe. The sound of footsteps returned, louder and more insistent this time, moving around me in a disorienting pattern. Shadows flitted across the walls, and I could hear faint whispers, pleas for help, cries of anguish that seemed to come from every direction. Panic surged through me as I struggled to stay conscious, my body numb from the cold. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I managed to push myself up, my hands trembling as I steadied my breathing. The woman was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence of the kitchen. I glanced around, desperately searching for any sign of her. But the room was empty once more. Gathering my resolve, I returned to my table, my mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. Karen was still behind the counter, oblivious to the supernatural encounter I had just endured. I sat down, my legs weak from the ordeal, and tried to calm my racing heart. As I finished my meal in silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, guiding me through the dark, haunted corners of that KFC. The experience left me with more questions than answers, a lingering sense of unease that followed me long after I left the restaurant. In the days that followed, I researched the history of that particular KFC in Tulsa. I discovered that decades ago, in the early 1950s, a young woman named Evelyn Harper had worked there. She was beloved by the staff and patrons alike, known for her kind demeanor and warm smile. But one winter night, during a fierce blizzard, Evelyn vanished without a trace. Despite extensive searches, no evidence of her whereabouts was ever found, and her disappearance remains a mystery to this day. The locals whispered about her spirit lingering in the restaurant, unable to find peace after her untimely disappearance. Some claimed to have seen her ghostly figure, while others spoke of strange occurrences during late-night hours, doors opening on their own, utensils moving without reason, and the faint sound of her laughter echoing through the halls. My experience that night seemed to confirm those stories, the spectral presence of Evelyn Harper reaching out from the past to communicate with the living. It was a chilling reminder that some spirits remain tethered to the places they once called home, their unfinished business leaving them restless and seeking closure. Months later, I returned to that KFC with a newfound understanding and a desire to honor Evelyn's memory. I spoke with Karen, sharing my encounter and the history I had uncovered. Together, we decided to hold a small memorial service, inviting the staff and local community to come together in remembrance of Evelyn. On the anniversary of her disappearance, we gathered in the dining area, lighting candles and sharing stories of her kindness and the impact she had on our lives. As we spoke, the air grew warmer, the oppressive cold replaced by a comforting warmth that filled the room. We played her favorite songs, hoping to bring peace to her restless spirit. As the night wore on, I felt a gentle presence beside me, the temperature returning to normal as if a weight had been lifted. The candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow that illuminated the faces of those gathered. It was then that I saw her, Evelyn Harper, her ethereal form standing at the end of the table, a serene smile on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've given me peace." With that, her apparition faded, the room enveloped in a sense of calm and closure. The haunting presence that had plagued that KFC was finally at rest, allowing Evelyn to move on from the earthly realm and find the peace she had long been denied. In the years since that night, the haunted tales of the Tulsa KFC have transformed into stories of redemption and remembrance. The strange occurrences ceased, replaced by a sense of tranquility that now permeates the restaurant. Evelyn's memory lives on, a testament to the enduring bonds between the living and the spirits that watch over us from beyond. But even now, on particularly cold winter nights, I sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of her silhouette in the corner of my eye, a gentle reminder that some spirits remain close, watching over the places they once loved, forever a part of the stories we share and the memories we hold dear. And so, I warn others, Respect the places you frequent. Honor the memories of those who have passed. And understand that some encounters are more than just figments of the imagination. For in the heart of Tulsa, amidst the flickering lights and the silent snow, lies a story of love, loss, and the eternal quest for peace that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Story number 7. Shadows in the Grease, the haunted KFC of Kentucky. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of those eerie winter evenings lingering like the smell of fried chicken grease that used to cling to my clothes after a long shift. My name is James Carter, and I was an assistant manager at a KFC in rural Kentucky. Ground zero for one of the strangest, most unsettling experiences I've ever endured. It was the winter of 2012 when I transferred to this particular KFC, a standalone building perched at the edge of a small Kentucky town. It looked like any other franchise, red and white stripes, the smiling visage of Colonel Sanders welcoming patrons as they passed through the doors. But as the locals would whisper, this KFC had a story that set it apart, a story I was all too eager to dismiss as silly rumors. I remember the first time I heard the tale. I was wiping down the counters after closing, the fluorescent lights humming softly, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. Cora, one of the cashiers, leaned over and whispered conspiratorially, "You know, people say this place is haunted." I rolled my eyes. "Haunted? Really, Cora?" She nodded earnestly. "I've heard from some of the night shift workers. They say strange things happen in the winter, doors opening by themselves, utensils moving on their own, and this presence, like someone's watching you, but no one's there." I shrugged it off, finishing my nightly tasks, convinced that the isolation and late hours were playing tricks on people's minds. But as the winter deepened, and the nights grew colder, I began to notice the oddities myself. Started small. One night, I was working a close with Cora and Marcus, our fryer cook. We'd locked up at midnight, the customers long gone, the neon sign turned off to conserve energy. Only the humming of the refrigerator units and the soft clank of machinery settling as it cooled kept us company. That's when the front door opened. I froze, my rag still in hand. Marcus looked at me, confusion etched into his face, and I could see the hairs on Cora's arms standing on end. The door had swung open with that familiar whoosh of the pneumatic hinge, yet through the glass, all we saw was the empty parking lot, lit only by a single flickering street lamp. Snow fell steadily, piling up in drifts against the curb, and not a soul in sight. "Must be the wind," I said, trying to sound confident. But inside, unease coiled in my gut. Marcus hurried to close the door, double-checking the lock, while Cora stared out into the falling snow with an expression I couldn't decipher. Fear, pity, or something else entirely. Another time, in late December, I came in early to prep for a special order. The sun had just set, and the place was quiet. I was alone in the dining area, counting inventory, when I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate footsteps crossing the linoleum floor. I looked up, expecting to see Cora or Marcus arriving early, but no one was there. The footsteps continued, padding gently across the dining room, and then stopped near the door to the office. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small and hollow. No answer, only silence, and the faint smell of winter air seeping in through the vents. As weeks passed, the occurrences became more frequent. Doors opened, chairs scraped across the floor by invisible hands, and once, I found a set of fryer tongs perched atop the soda fountain, balanced precariously on its edge. None of the staff admitted to putting them there, and we all felt the tension mounting, like a band stretched too tight. Cora, being a local, finally told me the full story one bitter January evening. When the storm outside rattled the windows, we huddled around a portable space heater in the office, trying to warm our numb fingers. According to local legend, decades ago, some say as far back as the 1970s, a young woman disappeared in a snowstorm near this very spot. Some claimed she was last seen wandering these grounds, back when this place was just an empty lot and a rundown barn. Others whispered about a tragedy, a car broken down in the snow, a desperate attempt to find help, and a disappearance that left a family grieving and a community haunted by unanswered questions. They say her spirit lingers, especially during harsh winters, searching, lost, maybe even angry. Some believe she's trying to guide people away from the storm's worst dangers, while others insist she's luring them deeper into the night's embrace. I laughed at Cora's story at first, but my laughter sounded hollow in the darkened office. The memory of those footsteps and the door swinging open unaided weighed on my mind. Then came the night that sealed my belief in the supernatural. It was late January, and the blizzard outside was the worst I'd ever seen. The roads were closed, and it was just me, Marcus, and a new hire named Tanya stuck finishing inventory past midnight. The wind outside keened like a wounded animal, and the power flickered ominously. The colonel's portrait on the wall seemed to watch us, his painted eyes oddly judgmental in the uncertain light. Halfway through counting frozen chicken breasts in the freezer, we heard a scream. Tanya and I rushed out into the dining area, where Marcus stood, pale as a corpse, pointing towards the window. First, I saw nothing but swirling snow in the darkness. But then, a figure emerged from the veil of white, a woman, her long black coat flapping in the wind, her hair whipping across her face. She stood there, staring at us through the glass with hollow, dark eyes that somehow radiated a profound sadness. "Tanya, call the police," I whispered, my breath fogging the window as I leaned closer. Tanya fumbled for her phone, but Marcus grabbed my arm, his voice shaking. "James, look." He pointed to the snow near the woman's feet. Footprints appeared in the snow, forming a chaotic pattern that defied logic. They seemed to start and end in midair. No source and no destination. The woman tilted her head slightly, as if curious about us, then raised a hand and tapped gently on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I mustered my courage and approached the window. "Do you need help?" I called, though my voice trembled. The woman's expression did not change. There was no sound but the sigh of the wind. She raised her hand again, pressed it flat against the glass, and I swear I could feel the chill of it seeping through. Suddenly, in one blink, she vanished, gone. No footprints to mark her retreat. No sign she had ever been there at all, except for a faint handprint, steaming slightly on the pane, which then faded as if consumed by the cold. The door behind us creaked. We spun around, and to our horror, the dining chairs had rearranged themselves into a circle. At the center lay a single glove, old, tattered, and crusted with ice. Tanya screamed, and Marcus cursed under his breath, while I stood rooted to the spot, 1,000 questions screaming in my mind. Why us? Why this place? What did she want? As the storm raged outside, we tried to ignore the whispers we heard. Yes, whispers. Faint voices carried on the wind, drifting through the cracks in the walls, murmuring just below the threshold of understanding. If we strained to listen, we caught snatches of words. Lost. Cold. Help. Home. It dawned on me then, perhaps this presence, this ghostly figure, was not an agent of malice but a lost soul, trapped in eternal winter. Maybe she was trying to guide us somewhere safe, or warn us of some unseen danger lurking in the darkness. But what danger? Other than the storm itself? We decided to leave. Better to brave the whiteout than remain in that haunted KFC. With flashlights in hand, we pushed out into the storm. The snow stung our faces. The wind howled, but we followed a strange intuition that guided our steps. The whispers grew louder, forming a soft chorus that led us away from the main road, through a narrow alley between drifts of snow, until we came across a stranded SUV half buried in a ditch. Inside the SUV, a family of 3 huddled together, their faces blue with cold, their voices too weak to call for help. We managed to free them, guiding them back to the warmth of the KFC's kitchen, where the fryers and ovens provided heat and shelter. They cried with relief, grateful beyond words. As dawn broke and the storm finally relented, I stepped outside to survey the aftermath. The sky was pale blue, the air crisp and silent. Of the mysterious woman, there was no sign, just miles of pristine snow and empty roads. But I couldn't shake the feeling that her spirit had been watching over us, pushing us to discover the stranded family and save them before it was too late. In the weeks that followed, as life returned to normal, the memories of that night lingered in the quiet corners of my mind. The local news covered the heroics of the rescue, but never mentioned the ghostly figure in black. The KFC staff exchanged knowing glances, their silent pact to keep the secrets of that stormy night locked away. But I know what I saw. We all do. And when the winter winds blow fierce and the snow gathers at our doors, we remember her, the silent watcher, the weaver of shadows in the storm. We recall the whispers, the strange footprints, the feeling of being guided by an unseen hand. I often think about the nature of the world, about the boundaries between life and death, and about the cold, dark spaces where spirits might linger. Perhaps she was a lost soul, drawn to the warmth of human life, seeking redemption or simply a connection in the heart of the storm. Or maybe she was a guardian, ensuring that even in our darkest hour, kindness and hope can prevail. As another winter approaches, I gaze out at the snow-covered parking lot and listen to the wind. The KFC sign flickers in the twilight, and I wonder if she's still out there, wandering the frozen roads, watching over travelers who dare to brave the storm of the century. The thought sends a shiver down my spine, but not entirely from fear. There's comfort in knowing that even in the depths of a blizzard, we are not truly alone. And so, I warn others, respect the forces of nature, honor the memory of those who have been lost, and understand that some storms carry more than just snow and ice. They bring whispers of souls who wander through the white abyss, guiding us toward compassion and survival. Even when we cannot see their faces,